Hello, this is Mike Swanson, and you're listening to the Wall Street Window podcast. In a few moments, I'm going to be speaking with a very special guest. I'm going to be talking with Carmine Savastano, who just released 10 days ago a book titled Human Time Bomb, subtitle, The Violence Within Our Nature. That book has gotten an interesting response already. There are 7 reviews for the book on Amazon.com. If you go to Amazon.com, you can buy the book yourself or check out these reviews. Just go there and type in Human Time Bomb. And all the reviews are positive. Every single one of them, 5 stars. One says, wow, great endeavor to see where the evidence leads. And the discussion I'm going to have with Carmine in a few moments is about how what I asked him was, do the personal psychological triggers that cause individuals to commit violence or acts of aggression, which actually are very commonplace, forget about physical violence, but you as someone on the internet see aggression constantly in social media among trolls, people posting aggressive statements in the way they comment on things and so forth. But do all these sort of individual behaviors lead to organized mass violence? Is there a connection between the two? And that's what we're going to talk about. But I want to tell you, we are seeing, you could say, carnage this week in the stock market. The Dow fell 3 days, almost 1,000 points. One of them was 1,000 points. I'm doing this at 3:30 on Thursday, and the Dow is down today. It's down 830 points, 3%, and it looks like a waterfall on the chart. It's pretty nasty, not fun if you're in that, and that's a situation I'm going to have to be on top of now. Does this represent a big change in the market trend? The good news is, we're probably at closer to the end of this drop, if not seen it, than the beginning. We've seen real panic selling today in the markets as the VIX has risen above 30. But what is the meaning of all this? Because I think it's much more than simply the coronavirus. In fact, the emerging markets ETF today was barely down. The Chinese stock market ETF also was barely down. So there were markets outside the United States that weren't down as much. In fact, another one, Germany was down 1.5%, which is half what the Dow was down. So the argument that this is coronavirus fears, I don't really think is the complete explanation, because if that were the case, the fears would be all over the world and not simply in the Dow. Look, the Italy ETF was down 0.5%, and that's a country that has a city or town under some sort of quarantine. So this is not a global financial panic over coronavirus. Something else is happening, and this is something we have got to be on top of. So follow my blog posts, follow my videos, follow my content, and we'll be on top of this there. So all that said, it's now time. One quick break, and we'll be talking with Carmine.
Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, I'm interested in the truth about the JFK assassination.
Right. Well, what do you want to know?
Judy Baker's wild claim, Oswald girlfriend, she knew Ruby and Barry, cancer weapons. Really?
I imagine I could claim I have 4 wheels. It doesn't make me a wagon, but okay.
Oswald was on the kill team and trying to prevent the murder of John Kennedy. Come on now. Has a real expert on the JFK assassination looked into her claims?
Go to Amazon.com, enter Judith Baker in her own words. You'll get results for a digital copy of a book where Wall Walt Brown utilizes her own words and the known evidence in the case to get at, well, a different perspective, let's say. You can get Judith Barry Baker in her own words from the author himself, signed if you request it, by contacting Dr. Brown at KIASJFK@AOL.com. It's a fun book, and it actually dissects the many, many fantastic claims. Judith Barry Baker in her own words.
Thank you for all the great information.
Hi, Carmine. How you doing?
I'm good, Mike. Good to be back.
Yeah, well, your book is out for everyone to finally buy, Human Time Bomb, The Violence Within Our Nature, both in Kindle and paperback. If people just go to Amazon.com, they can grab it. And the last time we talked, it was about your book, and we primarily spoke about the first part of it, which is really about human nature and the individual factors when it comes not only to violence, but to kind of the crazy world we live in now with social media and Discord and so forth. But you also, which we didn't get to, is link these things to state violence in the nation state and so forth. So what made you link the two things?
Well, I think that, when you look at any nation state, any group, basically, you can break them down to people. And usually there's dominant personalities that are present at the top. It's just the way that humans work. We, whether that dominance is based on physicality or their social ability, whether it's based on their ability to acquire wealth. There's a lot of things people might base it on, but essentially that person then becomes the head of the hierarchy, and then they try to dominate their opponents using other people who in turn do the same thing. And then all the way down until you have nation states engaged in, for instance, when there's conflicts between even interpersonal, non-important conflicts between leaders of countries, that can result in actual conflicts where people die. There are minor skirmishes and wars that have started over arguments that leaders have had about policy.
Well, do you think then that it's basically driven by the personalities of the people at the very top? Like say, World War I, the Kaiser versus the I don't even remember their names, but the fellas in France and Austria, and there's that assassination of that Archduke, and then you have World War II, of course, with those famous personalities, and Stalin and Hitler, and in Japan you have Tojo and his crowd that are basically running things, and then of course Roosevelt in the United States. So do you think it's driven by the sort of like these leaders are accumulating power, and then that's impacting their decisions?
Well, I think that is certainly a big part of it. I think that, you take those leaders and then you build up people in their, that are in their inner circles, and then those that are extended members of their inner circles, and you see how it then begins to affect other people. So basically it's the leader takes this position at the dominant part of the hierarchy, and then beneath them are people who are like-minded, who each have their own biases, who each want their own agenda to occur under the rubric of the leader. And then all the way down until you get to the very smallest, whether you're just an average public supporter, whether you're a grunt trooper in their army, through various means, propaganda, all the benefits of victory, all of the reasons why people will do the things that they do, I think can be reflected. And it comes down to basically just a personal attachment. It is that personal attachment, which, and that comes down to what we've discussed before: fear, status, violence. One of those three things usually is entwined within most of the decisions we make about everything. Status, money, what kind of car you drive, what sort of neighborhood you live in, what sort of people you like to associate, what sort of people you won't associate with. Fear, same thing, people who could be dangerous to you. And disgust, those who don't keep themselves in the manner that you are accustomed to, those who don't dress themselves in a certain way that you like, those who don't smell a certain way that you like. It all comes back to these little personal preferences that leaders of hierarchies can influence. And then they influence societies, and then societies begin to act in certain ways. You can see that every nation, there are distinct individual features in each of the nations that are affected by their leadership.
Well, if I flip that kind of line of thinking around, I might say, okay, we discussed recently in the last time, a lot of individual violence is done for psychological reasons. People that are psychopathic and so forth, they may do murder while someone else might just get angry or something. So if I don't like countries doing wars and doing, bombing people or invading other countries or mistreating their own people, even, should I just think, well, these damn leaders, the problem is they're psychopaths, and if people would just stop listening to these leaders, it seems like the psychopaths always rise to the top, so let's just kind of get rid of this. So if the whole world would just stop listening to these people, then we could just move on.
Well, here's the problem. And that would, if we could only choose good leaders, that would solve everything. But unfortunately, that isn't the human tendency. The human tendency is to want someone who is strong, want someone who they think can protect them. The human tendency is to want someone who agrees with what they think the world should be like. You often hear in political events that, when people talk about someone they want to vote for someone that they'd like in real life, someone that they'd have a beer with. And that doesn't necessarily make a good leader. That just makes someone you'd like. It doesn't necessarily follow that we must like everything about our leaders. If you like everything about your leader, chances are you don't know everything about your leader because your leader's a human being, and no human being is perfect. No human being is without great flaws. We all have flaws.
Yeah, but there have been leaders who've claimed that they are perfect.
Oh, and they're liars.
Or they're divine.
Those are liars. Because there is no perfect human, despite what some might have claimed.
You don't think Commodus was divine?
No, I don't. I think he had some very insightful. It was divine. That's hilarious. Or I was mistaken. Yeah, you said Commodus. I was thinking of Anthony. Or sorry, Marcus Aurelius is who I was thinking of. Yeah, not Commodus. Or Nero. How about Nero was divine? Yeah, and it just shows you the ridiculousness of any world leader, and that includes modern ones that try to use religion as a means of domination over other people. Religion, whether it's the Queen of England or the Ayatollah in Iran, does not entitle anyone to leading other people. Religion should be separate from the state. It has no place being involved with the state. Religion is supposed to be a private thing. Keep it to yourselves. If you want a fair society, you don't have religion involved, because religion is based on biases and prejudices not found in reason. If you want a fair society, you have it based in reason, and everybody's equal under the law. That's,
What you have, it's interesting, in your book, you have basically an examination of the United States as just a country that's, we're all more familiar with American history than the history of England or something because we're Americans. But, you have it as a case study of the violence our country has done. And you also have one of Russia. And it occurs to me, just as we're talking, that I don't think anyone at least in the 20th century, I don't think the idea that the United States, a lot of people believe the United States is a Christian country, but I don't think that concept has been really fervent or really linked to the wars we've been in any real meaningful sense. But I think it might be the opposite case when it comes to Soviet history. In fact, I watched the other year when Oliver Stone had this series of interviews with Putin, and Putin made the comment that he made the argument that the Soviet Union, communism, was a religion, and since it's gone, he is promoting Orthodox, the Orthodox.
Yeah, Russian Orthodox Christianity.
Yeah, that type of Christianity, the Russian Orthodox Church. But anyway, it's just interesting that religion maybe played more of a role in the history of Russian violence in the 20th century than American violence.
Well, I think it was incorporated, and that's something I'm sure that the supporters of these ideologies don't like to hear, but it's a point not only do I make in the book, but I think it's something that evidence supports, is that any ideology, if taken to extremes, becomes a cult. And if a cult gets big enough, it becomes a religion. And essentially, that's what that ideology that dominated the Soviet Union via fear, via disgust of the West, and disgust of anyone who broke from the ideology, that's religion. It was a state religion, basically. And that's what I see developing in other areas, shockingly, in my opinion, in parts of the U.S. too, is people taking an ideology and pushing it to such an extreme that it becomes like a pseudo-religion for them. They begin to make decisions that affect their lives and the lives of those around them, that affect their social relationships, that hurt their social relationships in a lot of instances, because they're trying to conform to this ever-changing ideal. And if, by doing that, I don't think a lot of people realize that if you're constantly judging people on a shorter and shorter list of acceptable traits, you're eventually going to be alone. Because no one's going to live up to all of them.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what's happening, in my opinion. I think and it's being augmented by the technology that we've discussed before, that's making people more antisocial and more detached from normal socialization. So, you're judging all the people that you say you care about and pushing them away as you're not engaging with people and, insulating yourself more from society. That's not going to lead down a good path. And that's what we see, that's what we saw in the break of Russian society in the 80s as they came to, for a little while anyway, before Putin took over, to a more free, system. And we've seen it in the U.S. at various times, like during the civil rights movement. When people are being mistreated, eventually they will rise up. They will, demand their rights. They will demand the chains to be broken. And all of this, if you look at it, emerges from, you see with certain leaders pushing unjust policies, that eventually there is a response. But now what we're seeing is people, instead of getting together in a peaceful manner, giving a list of their grievances as they are entitled under the law and having them redressed, has instead morphed into people just joining these little pseudo ideologies and attacking people and trying to destroy them via social media and, by canceling them and various, And that's not new. It's not new that people go after other people unfairly and try to destroy them. Mob mentality has existed for a long time. But now the mob has more tools. So the mob can chase you in other places that before you could actually move away and the mob couldn't find you. Now you can't do that. Now the mob finds you no matter where you are. Now the mob goes after your friends and your family. And we've got to stop it. We can't let this become what discourse is.
Well, yeah, it's something else, but I've kind of we've got you off the topic.
Sorry, I was just
No,
giving you
no,
more.
I've done it. It doesn't matter really. But
But what you were going into with nation states, I would say that that plays into it. That's that's precisely what those national leaders, and now I have no doubt that there are national leaders still operating under those pretenses, that they can guide the mob, that they can
right,
start a problem. Like with Stalin. Stalin said it's fifth columnists, it's traitors everywhere. Well, let's take a little look at the arguments we've seen between left and right in the U.S., where it's all of the leftists, communists, or it's all of the Russian people and people who are working with it's the same thing. It's dissent, mixed with rumor, and then they just attack and demonize each other. And none of
yeah,
it's proven. None of it's ever been laid out with evidence. It's tribalism. And we have to call it what it is. We have to, there is no justification, like I was saying about with the mob mentality. You get that mob mentality, and there is it's actually a left-wing comedian. She's probably better known for her acting, but Janine Garofalo, who some people think is an absolute leftist, but I can appreciate people from both sides. I have friends who are left and right-wing, unreasonably at times. But something she said, she was talking about a French philosopher who he had wrote a book called The Crowd, and it talked about the mob mentality of people, that the larger the group is, usually the lower the intelligence gets. And that pretty much plays out when you look at it. The bigger a group of people, the more easily they can be led, the more easily they can be inspired to do things they wouldn't normally think of doing on their own. And that's what these national leaders did. They used the mob mentality to get people to bend to their will and to do what they would think is unthinkable in their own lives.
yeah. I actually have that book. It's been so long. It's not that long. Yeah, it's not that long. Gustavo Le Bon wrote it,
Yeah.
but a lot of people. It's one of these books that people in the financial markets often cite, because it's not necessarily, I mean, like I said, it's been so long since I read it, but I don't remember him writing about like lynchings or something, like the crowds killing people.
Oh, no. But what I'm saying is that just that you lower their intelligence, just that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think
Well,
level.
one thing I remember, and again, I'm not going to get this 100% correct, is that he has like a metaphor in the book of, let's say you're on a boat with 100 people or something, and the boat, we're all out in the ocean, and someone says they see land, and then someone else says they see land. Next thing you know, everyone on the boat thinks they see land, but there's nothing there.
Exactly.
So that was kind of his. That was
Almost.
kind of the thinking process. It's that the crowd becomes unified in the way they think, like becomes a mass mind or something.
Yeah.
That was kind of, and his was like a pioneering book, on this type of topic of crowd psychology. It was like written in the 1800s. It was, but anyway, but yeah, in these leaders, and you show it in your book with Stalin, they manipulate these crowds of people and really work up the propaganda. Like this French book by this guy, he doesn't talk about propaganda or governments really, but that really gets, becomes the tool, of Stalin and Hitler and all these characters. And even today, you hear stories of, didn't read them in detail, but supposedly like in Africa, there's been mass killings in some of these countries between tribes and stuff, where people are pumping out propaganda to do these things or demonize their enemies on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Now they have all the tools that they would have used at the time, and as you said with Le Bon's book, it's an old method, and it works still. It'll always work because we're tribal. If there is any great argument, that I would make in a conversation about human ancestry. We act a lot like tribal beasts when we're in the right situation. I would say that there's a real distinct pattern between primates and us when we get into situations, and with violence, and when any of our primal triggers go off, it's easier for us to be manipulated. And people know this, and they use this to their benefit, especially world leaders. So I'm not saying that, I know people are going to say that this sounds so cynical, but it's based on evidence. It's based on patterns that humans have repeated over and over throughout history. So what other guidance should I go by? I can't hope on the best of human nature. Yes, there are good people, and I hope that they lead us, but a lot of times they don't. So we have to protect ourselves. We have to, we have to be informed about what are the tools that will be used against us. And, it's not even always going to be a nefarious, propaganda machine like some countries churn out. Sometimes it's just going to be someone wants you to do something, and they're going to know the buttons to press. So, but if you don't know that those buttons are there, you're never going to be able to resist.
Yeah. Sometimes people want they just happy to follow these things, it seems like.
Well, and that's, unfortunately, it's also part of our nature. You know what I mean? It's like, another thing we talked. I won't go too deep in this because we talked about it on one of the other shows. But with hierarchies, there is no structure that basically exists that is useful that we need to get rid of. And a lot of people are people want to rewrite the book. They want to change human nature, and they want to rewrite science, and they want to ignore biology, and that's going to lead nowhere good. It's going to lead to this is all these questions have been answered. People can try to parse and debate each of the little slight areas of exception or mutation that have occurred, but that isn't going to redefine the whole. Things exist as they are because that's the way they have worked for our survival. And I think a lot of people need to learn to accept that we can change certain things, but you cannot just rewrite the entire history of humanity, especially of violence and how people react, because you want to. Sorry, that's not good enough. You're going to need some substantial evidence. And I think a lot of confusion is generated now because there are people, as you said, like some of these national leaders, just spewing whatever they think as if it's meaningful, and it's not. When the rubber hits the road, it falls apart because they have no facts. They just have emotions and feelings to make their statements.
Well, we'll have to get deeper into what you write about Russia and also the United States.
Yeah, I'm sorry that we jumped around.
No, that's how I do. That's just how conversations work, But we'll have to, and really to do it better, I need to prepare a couple questions ahead of time too. So I need to go back through it and do that.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, we can go over that stuff, but hopefully everybody enjoyed it. I think that, the book comes out, or actually the book will be out by the time you hear this.
Oh yeah, it's out.
Please check out the book.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, maybe anyway, I better shut up so I can let you go. But what the difference between the U.S., Russia? I mean, the different characteristics of what this violence even is, but with the Russians or the Soviet Union and the United States, it's big differences for sure. So, and lots of stuff people don't even know about happened in Russia.
Yeah, and unfortunately some similarities too. As just injustices that were done, unnecessary violence.
Sure.
But and that's what I think the big unifying thing is amongst most countries is that no country in the world, no matter how benign or nice they might be now, if you look, I would think a century or more, that's not the way it was. No country that currently exists was founded upon a totally peaceful inhabitation of their area. Every country has done something. So that's why I think that, a lot of this, the ideologies we're talking about earlier, where everybody wants to be judgmental and tell everybody what they think and what they're allowed to say or what they're not allowed to say. Everyone should just be quiet about that, in my opinion, because no one has the ground to stand on. No one has the moral purity that they would hope. That it's before you judge someone else. Why don't you think about all of your country's sins, all the things your country has done that is an injustice, before you spout off about what you think somebody else's country needs to do. But anyway, I don't. Just showing a little my disdain for moralistic judgments.
There's one place. No, there's one place that has been founded without any violence. And there's a guy named Dennis Hope, and what he does is he sells property deeds for the moon.
You know what?
And people have bought their deeds, and $20 an acre, and some of them have created countries out of that. So that's
we'll see if there's any moon dwellers underneath the surface.
That want the
property, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can fantasize about it. He sends you a deed in the mail, and $20 an acre. So, but
kind of like selling the people who I've another. I don't want to impugn his good name. His questionable deed sales, since he can't enforce any of them. But anyway, I've heard of people selling stars too, which I think is another racket. It's like, you'll never get there. You'll never actually get to enjoy it or see it up close. But you give me $100 and you can name it. Until I'm gone, and then of course some other company will do it and resell your star.
So, but I'm being kind of silly, but it's just to say, the only way to do it is to
off this
come
planet.
up with something far out. So.
Yeah, somewhere else, maybe not on Earth.
Well, anyway, thanks for taking the time to talk to me and everyone else. We'll do the follow-up interview soon.
Okay, it was good talking to you, Mike. Have a good one.